He called me Susan for the first 3 months I worked there. My name's Sarah. Wears a $400 tie like it's a cape and thinks Excel is a form of witchcraft. That's David, the Duke of Deadlines. A man so allergic to accountability, he once blamed a server crash on retrograde Mercury. I knew I should have run when he called the Wi-Fi password classified intel. Rent is rent, and being a 43-year-old woman in tech is like trying to sell encyclopedias to TikTokers. No one wants it, but they pretend to be impressed. Apex Solutions was the kind of place where dreams went to be input into Salesforce and forgotten by lunch. Open floor plan, collaborative energy, and a break room stocked with expired granola bars and printer ink fumes. I was the IT administrator, not the kind that got flowers on sysadmin day. I was the duct tape, the firewall, the ghost in the goddamn machine. Nobody really noticed me unless Outlook was down or someone clicked a phishing email that offered free foot pics from HR. But while David strutted around misquoting Sun Tzu in budget meetings, attack is the best accountant. I was the only one who knew how to actually access, manage, and maintain the Client Intelligence Hub. That's what they called it, Client Intelligence Hub. It sounded sleek and expensive, but it was really just 14 years of my meticulous work building out the deepest, cleanest CRM database in the entire sector. I knew which client hated being called before 9 a.m., which ones had kids named Tanner and Tegan, which one had a secret side business making scented beard oils. It was my Mona Lisa, my Sistine Chapel, my tax-deductible baby. David didn't know that. Of course not. To him, I was just the IT gal, someone who reset passwords and unfroze the internet. Once, when I rolled out a back-end data consolidation protocol that shaved 11 hours off our monthly audit cycle, he said, and I quote, "neat." Then he high-fived the finance guy who took credit for the efficiency bump in the next board meeting. If sarcasm was a vitamin, I'd have been glowing in the dark by now, like to bark orders like a bored cruise director. "Let's move the data stuff faster," he'd say. What the hell does that mean? Faster than SQL queries? Faster than the laws of thermodynamics? Once he demanded, I upgrade the bandwidth by noon. I told him that wasn't how networks worked. He stared at me like I'd kicked his emotional support Tesla. My workstation was tucked behind a potted ficus that had been dead since Q4 2019. No one had the guts to toss it. Like everything at Apex, it looked healthy in the annual report, but was rotting on the inside. I did my job. I made the gears turn. I solved problems before they existed. I ran quiet updates during off hours, built self-healing scripts, and managed permissions so tightly even the interns couldn't download Solitaire without my blessing. And no one noticed. That's the curse of competence. You become invisible, but the resentment didn't stay hidden. It sat in my gut like rusted nails. Every time David misspelled encryption or CC'd the entire client list in an email titled "Let's Make Q3 Sexy," I lost another molecule of hope. My revenge fantasies started small. Maybe his car wouldn't start. Maybe he'd sit on a warm bagel. But lately, they'd gotten darker. Like what would happen if the hub went offline for just a day, or if a certain encrypted archive just happened to be couriered somewhere it shouldn't be. Not that I ever would, of course. I was too tired, too old, too burned out to be vindictive. That's what I told myself anyway. But then came that week. The server room flooded because someone, guess who, thought installing a cappuccino bar next to the cooling unit was visionary. And a legacy client complained that their entire purchase history had vanished because David thought archiving meant delete. I spent 3 straight nights restoring backups while living on vending machine peanuts and spite. And at the all-hands meeting Friday morning, David sauntered in 20 minutes late, sunburned from his stress management retreat, and said we needed to trim the fat in IT. Called it strategic restructuring. Winked at me while sipping a turmeric latte. Felt my molars grind. That afternoon, I looked around the office. At the people pretending their paychecks meant purpose. At the hallway lined with framed buzzwords, synergy, agility, grit. I looked at the blinking green light on my console, the one monitoring the secure admin channel only I had access to, and something in me shifted. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was ready. It started with the AppSync project, David's shiny new toy, Frankenstein of integrations meant to merge client-side analytics with our internal task management. It was held together with duct tape, blind optimism, and one very stressed-out junior dev named Craig who still called his mom before bed. David had pitched it to the board like it was the second coming of Salesforce. Promised deliverables. RAI. Seamless user immersion, whatever the hell that meant. I told him, the system wasn't ready. Pushing the rollout without completing QA on the API layer was like launching a boat with no hull and hoping for the best because you really believe in waves. He waved me off. Negativity is a cancer, Susan. That morning, AppSync failed in real time during a live demo with our biggest client, a six-figure account that made up 14% of our quarterly revenue. The client saw their entire sales history load as a black screen of JavaScript vomit. Regional director politely called it unusable. David called it a momentary hiccup. I called it Tuesday. And by noon, he needed blood. He marched across the office like a dictator late for his own beheading and summoned me with a single finger curl. My office. Now, everyone turned to look. Not one person made eye contact. It was the kind of silence you hear in hostage videos. His office was glass-walled, because of course it was. Transparency, accountability. Theater, he had that stupid motivational poster behind his desk. A bald eagle screaming over the words, "Leadership takes flight." "Sit," he barked, like I was a golden retriever who just peed on the rug. I didn't. I stayed standing. I wanted to feel my knees lock. He paced behind his desk like a man who once watched a movie about Steve Jobs and misunderstood the entire thing. "We need to talk about this culture of sabotage," he said, jabbing a finger at the AppSync postmortem on his monitor. "There's a pattern here, and frankly, Sarah, if that is your name, you've been a bottleneck." My ears rang. "Excuse me? You delayed the security update last month. That was for a vulnerability in a deprecated plugin, your plugin, that no one even uses anymore." He raised his voice. "You didn't escalate that risk. You approved the risk. You literally signed the form." David's nostrils flared like an offended goat. "Don't understand the pressure I'm under. The board is asking questions, and I need to demonstrate strong leadership. The kind that takes action. The kind that protects the mission." I almost laughed. "Your mission is your ego on a flash drive." His tone dropped to that oily, condescending purr he reserved for interns and women who contradicted him. "Look, I know this is hard, but the truth is we've been carrying you." I blinked. "Carrying me? You're lucky we employ you." There it was. He said it like he was tossing scraps to a stray dog. Like the last decade of automation, database design, emergency recovery protocols, all of it was charity work on his part. I stood there, and it was like every moment of exhaustion, every time I'd patched his mistakes or absorbed his temper tantrums, snapped into focus. "You're letting me go," I said. He nodded. "Effective immediately. HR will process the paperwork. Turn in your badge before end of day." I looked at the eagle poster again. It didn't scream leadership. It screamed idiot bought this at a kiosk near the Cinnabon. "Fine," I said, calm, too calm. My voice had no air in it, just ice. "Best of luck," he added, already swiveling back to his laptop. "And Sarah, don't burn bridges, this industry talks." I smiled, slow, like a fuse-catching light. As I walked out of his office, every step felt unreal. I was wading through a dream I hadn't realized I'd had 1,000 nights in a row. A few coworkers glanced up. One mouthed, "What happened?" Another stared at their screen, too afraid to look. What happened? What happened was that I'd spent 10 years building the most elegant, scalable, encrypted client database in the state, and the man who just fired me thought I was a receptionist who once installed a printer. And what was about to happen? That was going to be beautiful. Silence when I stepped out of that glass box was thick enough to chew. No one said a word. You could hear the server fans whispering through the vents. I walked past the intern station, where poor Danielle looked up with wet eyes like I'd just been executed for treason. I didn't stop, didn't wave, just made a beeline toward my desk like I wasn't carrying 10 years of bruises stitched into my spine. Every pair of eyes said the same thing: "Sorry, Sarah." But no one moved. No one ever moved, not here. Apex was a place where people survived by stillness. If you didn't rustle, you couldn't be blamed. I used to think that made sense. Now, it made me want to set the walls on fire. I dropped into my chair and flexed my fingers once. One deep breath, no panic. I had minutes, maybe 5, before HR flagged IT and triggered the lockout protocol. I knew the drill. I built the drill. The thumb drive was already in my bag, not some cheap gas station USB stick. Either, this was a military-grade encrypted solid-state beauty I'd picked up at DEF CON on a whim 5 years ago. Everyone else bought branded stress balls and hoodies. I bought plausible deniability. I plugged it in under the desk where no one could see. The first command was simple: launch Archangel. the mirrored backup system I'd written during a 3-day flu while watching reruns of the X-Files. The second command, one triggered a cascade. Full dump of the CRM, encrypted at-rest data packets from our client chat servers, billing history, contracts, audit logs, all of it. The soul of Apex Solutions, all the high-value targets David couldn't name on a bet, now trickling into my private vault in tidy, labeled folders. I encrypted it twice, then wiped the transfer logs. My heart was doing something ugly in my chest, like it wanted to run away without me. My hands didn't shake, they never shook. Slack pinged once, "Craig, are you okay?" I didn't respond. Another window popped up, automatic, "Your password will expire in 1 minute, right on time." I opened one last terminal and pushed a silent command, "Revoke my own credentials." Let them think the system caught it. Let them think they won the race. They didn't. I pulled the drive, slipped it into my glasses case, closed the lid, stood. There was no cardboard box, no framed photos. Just me, my bag, and a brain full of classified architecture. Danielle half stood as I passed. "Sarah, wait, are you?" I touched her shoulder. "It's fine. Stay where it's safe." She sat back down, stunned. The elevator dinged open like it had been waiting for this scene all day. As I stepped in, David was still in his office, gesturing at some chart with that smug little flourish he used when lying about numbers. The kind of flourish that said, "About to be wrong," loudly. He didn't look at me. I smiled and pressed the ground floor. The doors closed. Outside, the air hit like a slap. Summer humidity pressed in around me, thick with exhaust and rage. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. People brushed past, lost in their own bubbles. I was just another middle-aged woman with a purse and tired eyes. No one knew what I'd done. No one knew what I had. I felt the first tremor of panic in my gut, not regret, magnitude. I had just stolen a digital arsenal. If Apex Solutions had a heart, I was now its black market cardiologist. Every project lead, every sales pipeline, every dormant lead that could be resurrected into profit, mine. And the worst part, it felt good, too good. The terror was there, sure. Legal fallout, prison time, professional exile, my brain could run through the list with military precision. But under all that, a rush. Same feeling you get when you slam a door that's been creaking for years and finally hear silence. I'd walked out without a word and left a loaded gun on the table with no one to check the safety. I didn't sleep that night, not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't. The moment I closed my eyes, I saw folder names and client tags and metadata trails swimming across my eyelids. The digital weight of what I'd done didn't just sit on my chest, it nested, curled up like a smug little cat, and purred every time I thought about David's smug face crumpling under a bad quarterly report. I sat on the floor of my apartment in sweatpants that smelled like 3 stressed days ago, surrounded by open notebooks and cold coffee cups, watching the fan spin above me like a countdown clock. I had the data. I had the motive. But motive without method, that's just therapy. The part of me that used to keep the system humming, logical, redundant, never-fail part, kept whispering warnings. You could get caught. They could trace it. "This is illegal, Sarah. You are one subpoena away from becoming a LinkedIn ghost story." But the rest of me, the part that had spent a decade swallowing condescension like office coffee, that part was already crafting the next move. It had to be anonymous. Not just fake name anonymous, crypto scrubbed, metadata bleached, burned the fingerprint off the glass anonymous. Booted up my sandbox laptop, Linux distro, no persistent memory, VPN routed through a node in Iceland. I used it once to troll David with a fake phishing email from CEO Confessions at AOL.com. He never figured out why the board started asking about his personal wellness retreats. First step, build a communication channel. No names, no logs. I spun up 3 throwaway Proton Mail accounts, 2 encrypted messaging aliases, 1 redirect server hosted through a Tor Onion domain. If Innovate Inc. wanted to answer, they'd have to really want it. Second step, the message. Not a data dump, that would be sloppy, obvious. Amateurs send spreadsheets and pray. Professionals send questions only insiders know to ask. I found her easily. Miranda Chung, Apex's living nightmare. VP of Strategic Growth at Innovate Inc. Her LinkedIn profile was so polished it could slice paper. Her conference talks always included phrases like customer churn velocity and experience optimization. She used to be Apex's marketing director before she left to pursue a more visionary roadmap. Translation: she was too smart to let David's incompetence stain her reputation. Subject line: market sensitivity, discrete insight, available body. You don't know me, but you've seen my fingerprints across every client Apex Solutions hasn't lost. Yet you remember the Tybalt account, right? You should. You almost had them before we promised exclusive onboarding protocols. Ask your team why they suddenly went quiet last year. Now ask yourself how I knew that. This isn't blackmail. This is a fork in the road. Respond once, just once, and I'll know you're smart enough to recognize an open door when it swings. No attachments. No direct identifiers. Enough to make any senior strategist choke on her almond milk latte. Tybalt Industries was a high six-figure client who'd been poised to switch to Innovate last March before David intervened with a suite of empty promises I spent 3 weeks scrambling to make look real. I personally built the data sandbox we used to fake those proprietary integrations. Miranda would remember. You don't forget when a whale slips the hook. I encrypted the message, routed it through 3 blind jumps, and hit send. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. My heart was jackhammering in my chest, but I wasn't scared. Not exactly. What I felt was awakening, like the first deep breath after years of shallow ones. I'd been so small at Apex, kept in a glass box behind firewalls of ego and mediocrity. Now, I was moving in a different layer. A place where power wasn't shouted in meetings, it was whispered in code. World hadn't ended, the sky hadn't cracked open, but my world had tilted just a few degrees. I wasn't Sarah the administrator anymore. I was the ghost in the wires. I woke up to chaos and I hadn't even had coffee yet. It started with a text from Craig. Craig, 7:12 a.m., did you see this? Innovate just dropped some kind of psychic ad campaign. It's like they read our CRM. Clients are freaking out. Psychic. Cute. I rolled out of bed and grabbed my laptop like it was a loaded weapon. My hands didn't shake, but they didn't feel entirely steady either. I pulled up LinkedIn, Twitter, Reddit, even Nextdoor, for God's sake. And there it was everywhere. Innovate Inc. had launched a coordinated multi-platform campaign called Unleash Real Support. Clean visuals, crisp taglines. But what really made my breath hitch? The targeting. Each ad spoke to the specific complaints our top-tier clients had quietly filed over the last year. Not vague platitudes, specifics. Sick of automated responses? One banner read, talk to a human in less than 90 seconds. We promise. And deliver. That was lifted verbatim from a private Apex support ticket logged by our second-largest client, Marlock Tech. Another one said, no more vaporware dashboards. Just results. Was straight from a confidential post-cancellation survey from the Tybalt account. It was surgical. It was brutal. It was mine. My chest filled with a thick, giddy panic. The way your stomach flips when you're on a roller coaster, but this one was made of consequences and cunning. I refreshed our competitor analytics site. Innovate's click-through rates were already climbing. Their site had a new inbound portal labeled for the underserved, discreet, polite, ruthless. By noon, Apex's corporate Twitter account was in defense mode. We value your feedback. We're always evolving. The kind of meaningless PR vomit that smells like panic in a Gucci suit. Craig texted again. Craig, 12:22 p.m., Marlock just canceled. Mid-cycle. I heard 3 more are reevaluating partnerships. David's losing it. He accused the entire analytics team of espionage by incompetence. Lol. I did laugh, out loud. A sharp, crooked little laugh that startled my cat off the windowsill. I wasn't watching a ship sink. I was watching the captain throw the lifeboats overboard and shout, we're still innovating. The updates kept coming. Innovate dropped a slick video ad on YouTube, narrated by Miranda chewing herself. That voice, all velvet blades. We understand the difference between software that talks and systems that listen. Had 80,000 views by dinner time and was trending in our sector's niche forums by nightfall. Meanwhile, Apex's sales team was scrambling. Their client relationship portal was clearly down. Someone posted a screenshot from inside the account dashboard. Error 503, service unavailable. I knew that system. I knew its limits. It was buckling because every C-suite client was logging in at once, wondering why they hadn't been offered what Innovate was promising. Sat back and looked out my window. Just rows of identical apartment buildings, a skyline that didn't care what I'd done. But I knew, I felt it, in the pulse under my skin, in the stillness of the room. I had moved tectonic plates with a keyboard, and still, paranoia buzzed like static under the euphoria. Every time my phone lit up, I flinched. Every Slack screenshot Craig sent was both thrilling and terrifying. I scanned each one for any sign. Had they traced anything? They didn't. David wouldn't even know where to begin. He thought packet sniffing was a drug problem. The only logs they had on me were the kind I wrote myself: clean, ordinary, unsuspicious. That night, I poured a glass of cheap Merlot, opened my laptop, and watched Innovate's campaign burn through the digital landscape like gasoline on dry leaves. And somewhere between the third client cancellation and the fifth ad reposted with the caption, "Finally, someone gets it," I realized something dangerous. I wasn't scared anymore. I was hungry. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into sirens. By Wednesday, the exodus at Apex wasn't just alarming, it was biblical. Clients were walking out mid-contract, citing philosophical misalignment and agility concerns, which was corporate speak for "we've found someone better, smarter, and actually competent." Even the ones who hadn't signed with Innovate yet were circling like vultures, taking calls, scheduling demos, asking the kinds of questions you only ask when your foot's already halfway out the door. I knew what it meant. I'd built enough crisis dashboards in my day to recognize the numbers behind the noise. This wasn't a leak. This was arterial. And David, he went full witch hunt. At first, I thought maybe he'd just drown in his own incompetence, name the usual suspects, issue some weak public apology, and slink away. But no, the man may have been a peacock in a trench coat, but he wasn't stupid about self-preservation. He knew his ass was on the line now. His calls to the board were getting shorter. His calendar was suddenly empty. The apex predator of empty platitudes and half-baked synergy had realized he wasn't on top of the food chain anymore. He was bleeding in the water. And bleeding men lash out. Craig called that night, late. I answered on the second ring. "Don't say anything," he said. "Just listen." I sat upright. My chest went cold. They pulled the security logs, he whispered. Started comparing access records against terminated employee IDs. They're calling it a data breach, not incompetence, not a screw-up, an actual breach. "And David," he said, "your name." My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. What?" he said, and I quote, "Wouldn't surprise me if Susan took something on her way out. She always thought she was smarter than everyone else. He's playing it casual, but he's setting the table, framing the narrative." I pinched the bridge of my nose hard enough to see stars. Did he go to legal? He went to legal, compliance, and IT. He's trying to triangulate someone. They'll go through everything. Logs, emails, badge swipes. Anything they can pin to an ex-employee with admin clearance. Silence on the line throbbed. "You didn't actually," he trailed off. I didn't answer, because even the lie would have sounded too perfect. He sighed. "Look, I don't want to know. Just if you've got a fire to put out, now's the time to grab the extinguisher." "I appreciate the warning," I said, voice even. "Just be careful, Sarah. He's desperate. Desperate people don't care who gets caught, only that someone does." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. My apartment felt suddenly smaller. The walls too close, the blinds too thin. That old paranoia, that buzz I thought I'd shaken, came roaring back with fangs. They weren't just spinning, they were digging. I opened my secure shell, double-checked my VPN chain, wiped the temporary session logs on my sandbox, and ran a few diagnostics on the proxy mailboxes. All clean. I'd built my layers carefully. No direct trace. No file fingerprints. Dump had passed through 3 dead drops before I even zipped it. But airtight isn't the same as invisible. And suspicion doesn't need evidence, it just needs a narrative. And David, he was riding his. The thrill of victory started to curdle into something uglier: exposure. This wasn't a movie. There weren't violin strings swelling under a montage of justice. There were audit trails, NDA, federal data laws. And yet, I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Even as the wolves started sniffing around the door, even as the shadow of consequences stretched long across my living room carpet, I still remembered that moment of release. Of finally being seen, even if anonymously. But the game had changed. I wasn't just playing for revenge anymore. Now I was playing for survival. He called me at 6:17 p.m. on a Thursday, like a man who'd practiced his timing in a mirror. The name didn't flash on the screen, just unknown. But the minute the ringtone cut through my apartment, I knew. Only one person could make the air feel thick with mildew through a phone call. I let it ring twice before I answered. Calm voice, even tone. I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid of him, that I was already living in a different world, one where he couldn't touch me without gloves and a subpoena. "Hello?" A pause. Then, "Sarah. So glad I caught you." His voice was lacquered in that fake warmth he used when pretending he didn't just fire someone in front of a ficus. "David," I said, flat, not friendly. "I just wanted to check in. See how you've been doing. These transitions can be tough, and I thought maybe we didn't get a chance to part on the best terms. I could hear it, the twitch behind the words. Like he wanted to leap through the phone and throttle me, but was trying to pass it off as an alumni newsletter. Transitions, I repeated. That's a kind word for it, a tight chuckle. Well, I've had some interesting conversations lately, some questions raised. Thought maybe we could clear a few things up. Off the record, and there it was, the trap padded with civility. What sort of questions? I asked, sipping tea like it was champagne. Am I in trouble, David? Oh, no, of course not. Nothing formal. He cleared his throat. Just some irregularities in system access times, curious overlaps with project data. It's probably nothing. But legal asked if anyone might have, left with a misunderstanding of what belonged to who. I let a long silence hang. Then, that's a fascinating theory. You were very close to the systems, Sarah. You were, what do they call it? The super admin? You had visibility into everything. And that was my job, which you terminated. He chuckled again, brittle this time. We both know you were more than your job, Come on, you and I both know you could have walked out with anything. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Are you accusing me of something, David? Not at all, he said, a little too fast. I'm just saying if there was a situation, purely hypothetical, where a former employee had made questionable choices, it would be in their best interest to come forward now. Quietly, before it escalates, there it was, the veiled threat, the carrot wrapped in a noose. I see, I said. If someone had walked out with sensitive information, and I'm not saying they did, but if they had, wouldn't that be a catastrophic failure of the company's internal security protocols? Silence. I pressed just a little harder. Wouldn't that suggest negligence at the managerial level? Maybe even expose some personal liability? More silence. I could hear his breath, measured, tight. You know what I think, David, I said sweetly. I think you're scared, not because something happened, but because you know something could have. And that little glass castle you call a career is full of cracks you ignored for years. And now the wind's whistling through. You're playing a dangerous game, he muttered. I grinned, only if I'm on the field. But I've already left the stadium. He tried to recover. Look, Sarah, this doesn't have to be ugly. We're professionals. You cooperate, I protect you. Simple. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out over the quiet street like I was standing on the bridge of a ship watching an enemy fleet burn. I think we're done here, David. I'd wish you luck, but I don't believe in it anymore. He opened his mouth to speak, but I hung up. Let him sit with that silence. Let it rot in his gut. He had nothing. No logs, no trail, no proof, just a name. Mine, and the sinking realization that, for once in his life, was outplayed by the person he'd spent a decade overlooking. I went back to my tea, still hot, just like his seat. By the time the fiscal quarter closed, Apex looked less like a company and more like a cautionary tale in PowerPoint form. The investigation stalled. Not for lack of trying, David had flung resources at it like spaghetti at a wall, hoping something would stick. Forensics firms, external audits, even hired a private cybersecurity consultant who had a podcast called Digital Vengeance. But the breach, if you could even call it that, left no prints. No IP flags, no session trails. The only fingerprints were metaphysical, pressure points exploited, patterns predicted, secrets whispered just loudly enough for the right ears. Nothing they found pointed to me. Of course not. I'd built the security framework from the inside out. Every blind spot was by design. Every breadcrumb had been swept before I'd ever stepped into that elevator. What they found, however, was David's own incompetence, his reckless delegation, his mismanaged credentials, his smug overconfidence that the systems ran themselves, that the people beneath him were nothing more than parts in a vending machine of results. When the board called him in, it wasn't with questions. It was with a box. Word spread fast. LinkedIn updates, Slack whispers, even a leaked memo in a tech blog with the headline, Duke of Deadlines dethroned. The article was merciless. They quoted internal sources, pasted charts of Apex's stock dive, down 43% in a month. Investors bailed like rats from a church basement flood. Contracts were terminated. Lawsuits hinted at. HR bled staff in waves. Nobody wanted to be the last one standing in a house where the walls were whispering failure through every crack. Meanwhile, Innovate Inc. was thriving. Their client acquisition rate tripled. Miranda Chung gave a keynote at Tech Forward 2030 titled Anticipation over Reaction, winning with insight. It was clean, subtle, just enough of a wink to anyone who knew what had really happened. And I was waiting. Until the message came through. Not through anything obvious. It slipped into one of the dark mailboxes I'd set up for the initial drop. An unsigned message with no subject, no sender. Just a block of encrypted text that unfolded into, "We don't know who you are, but we know what you know, and we're interested in more of it. Same discretion. Better compensation." Attached, a secure portal and a contract. A consulting position. Anonymous. Off-book. Monthly retainer that was more than I made at Apex in 2 quarters, with bonuses for performance-based intelligence. They called it market analysis. But we both knew better. It was insight for hire. Corporate espionage in a silk robe. And I accepted. Not out of greed, not out of ego, but because I had crossed the line and found it wasn't a cliff. It was a corridor. They didn't want me in their office. They didn't want to know my name. They wanted the ghost, the voice in the data, the storm that had cracked Apex open like a rotted coconut. So I gave them what they asked for, carefully, strategically. I never passed direct files. I passed knowledge, subtle shifts in buyer behavior, key pain points in competitors' workflows, leaked language from pitch decks I never physically touched. I didn't steal, I understood, and they paid, handsomely. I upgraded my laptop, changed my network structure, converted half the cash into crypto, and let the other half rot in a savings account under a fabricated LLC called Quiet Perimeter, LLC. I no longer worked for company. I worked against them. I didn't celebrate when David's departure was made public. I didn't gloat when Apex's leadership page went dark, or when their domain registration lapsed for 48 hours and redirected to a parked GoDaddy page that said this site has expired. I just logged in, checked my aliases, read my messages, and smiled. The empire had fallen, and I was being paid to map the rubble. It's been 7 months since the call, the one from David, one where he tried to corner me with corporate charm and legal undertones, thinking I'd crack like the underpaid assistant he thought I was. 7 months since Apex Solutions started hemorrhaging clients like a punctured lung. Since their reputation, once polished with buzzwords and empty graphs, was exposed for what it was, a glossy dumpster fire rolling downhill. Now, I drink my coffee at 10:47 a.m. in a quiet apartment. No fluorescent lights humming overhead. No badge scanners. No bi-weekly alignment meetings where people pretended to listen while planning lunch orders in their heads. My desk is a real wood table, not pressed particle board pretending to be something it isn't. My office chair cost more than David's watch, and it's actually ergonomic. I work alone, quietly, elegantly. The consulting jobs are clean, compartmentalized. I drop insights into secure silos, fire off reports written in the language of executives, and sign everything with a stylized S. No one questions the ghost who keeps getting the market right. No one wants to. My calendar is sparse, but my accounts are not. I don't flaunt it. There's no convertible, no Instagram glow-up. I don't need the world to clap for me. I just need it to stay out of my way. Sometimes, when I'm feeling indulgent, I read the news. Apex Solutions was quietly acquired last month. The buyer was a tech hedge firm known for picking at the bones of once promising corpses. The valuation? Barely above liquidation. A decade of client relationships, code, infrastructure, and intellectual property sold off like mismatched furniture at a bankruptcy auction. I pictured the office empty, the ficus dead, the eagle poster curling at the corners behind glass no one cleans anymore. And then there was David. I found him on social media. He didn't post it himself, it was tagged by someone else. A photo outside a boutique electronics store. David, in a branded polo, half smiling beside a table of phone cases. The caption read, "Come meet our new assistant manager, Dave." Team player he looked, smaller. Not just physically, something in his posture had folded in on itself. Like the gravity of his own ego had finally collapsed. He still wore that same strained smile, the one he used in budget meetings right before tossing someone under the bus. Except now the bus was him. I didn't screenshot it, didn't forward it, didn't even chuckle. I just closed the tab and took another sip of coffee. Because here's the thing they never tell you about revenge. It's not the explosion. It's the quiet afterward. The clarity. The breathing room. Do I feel guilty? Some nights, sure. Stare at the ceiling and wonder how close I came to getting caught. I wonder who else took the fall, who got laid off in the vacuum I created. There are consequences. Of course there are. You don't fire a missile and pretend it only hits the target. But do I regret it? Not for a second. Because for once I wasn't the cleanup crew for someone else's arrogance. I wasn't the nameless cog in the wheel of bad leadership and broken promises. I was the lever, the fulcrum, the storm. They underestimated me. And now I work alone under no name but my own. The world doesn't know me, but it listens when I speak. I burned the bridge, salted the earth, and built something better in the ashes. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.